Mary Wollstonecraft, from A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, Chapter 9. Remember, when you are reading a primary source, you want to constantly think about, what do I know about Mary Wollstonecraft? What does she believe? And you always want to look at the questions that are on the reading. So if you look at your handout, you'll notice there are 5 questions. And those are going to lead you, those are going to guide you in what you're looking for. So Mary Wollstonecraft, um, where does she fit in with the Enlightenment? Of course, we know she is writing the Vindication of the Rights of Women, so she's going to argue that women do deserve those rights, do deserve to be educated, and you are going to read her argument for that. So if you look at question 1, it says, how does Wollstonecraft's concept of unnatural distinctions reveal Enlightenment thinking? In what respects is she a romantic? So think about the unnatural distinctions when you think about the savage beast or what nature is, how that fits with the Enlightenment. Second, why does Wollstonecraft place so much importance on the women nursing their own children? Third, what accounts for women's inferior status in society? What are Wollstonecraft's remedies? So start with a few questions before you start reading the actual document, and then you want to go back and read the document, or look at the questions and read and look at the questions so that you're comprehending. So I'm going to read this to you today. From the respect paid to property flow, as from a poisoned fountain, most of the evils and vices which render this world such a dreary scene to the contemplative mind. For it is in the most polished society that noisome reptiles and venomous serpents lurk under the rank herbage, and there is voluptuous pampered by the still sultry air, which relaxes every good disposition before it ripens into virtue. So what is she saying? As from a poisoned fountain, most of the evils and vices which render this world such a dreary scene. So what do we have in this polished society? What is lurking underneath? Um, Within this enlightened progressive society, is there ugliness? And that's where she starts her argument. It is vain to expect virtue from women till they are, in some degree, independent of men. Nay, it is vain to expect that strength of natural affection which would make them good wives and mothers, whilst they are absolutely dependent on their husbands. They will be cunning, mean, and selfish. And the men who can be gratified by the fawning fondness of spaniel-like affection have not much delicacy, for love is not to be bought in any sense of the words. So what is she doing? She's comparing love of a woman to a man, of a wife to a husband, to that of a dog. What is she saying? That women are dependent on men. And while they're dependent on men, they are not truly, you will not see their true feelings. Its silken wings are instantly shriveled up when anything besides a return in kind is sought. Yet whilst wealth enervates men, and women live, as it were, by their personal charms, how can we expect them to discharge those ennobling duties which equally require exertion and self-denial? Hereditary property sophisticates the mind, and the unfortunate victims to it, if I may so express myself, swathed from birth, seldom exert the locomotive faculty of body or mind, and thus viewing everything throughout one medium, and that is a false one, they are unable to discern in true merit and happiness consist. False indeed must be the light when the drapery of a situation hides the man, and makes him stalk in masquerade, dragging from one scene of dispensation to another the nerveless limbs that hang with stupid listlessness, and rolling around the vacant eye which plainly tells us that there is no mind at home. So what is she arguing about women? The naked eye, the vacant eye, which tells us that there's no mind at home. To illustrate my point, I need only observe that when a woman is admired for her beauty, and suffers herself to be so far intoxicated by the admiration she receives, as to neglect to discharge the indispensable duty of a mother, she sins against herself by neglecting to cultivate an affection that would equally tend to make her useful and happy. True happiness I mean all the contentment and virtuous satisfaction that can be snatched in this imperfect state must arise from well-regulated affections. And an affection includes a duty. Men are not aware of the misery they cause, and the vicious weakness they cherish. By only inciting women to render themselves pleasing, they don't consider that they are making natural and artificial duties clash. So men aren't aware. Women are sinning against themselves by not being mothers, by being these objects. By sacrificing the comfort and respectability of a woman's life to the voluptuous notice of beauty, when in nature they all harmonize. That's my favorite statement. When in nature they all harmonize. Unnatural. That first question, unnatural. How does Wollstonecraft's concept of unnatural distinctions reveal Enlightenment thinking? What are we doing to ourselves? Cold would be the heart of a husband, were he not rendered unnatural by early debauchery, who did not feel more delight at seeing his child suckled by its mother than the most artful wanton tricks could ever raise. Yet this natural way of cementing the matrimonial tie, and twisting esteem with fodder recollections, wealth leads women to spurn. To preserve their beauty and wear the flowery crown of the day, which gives them a kind of right to reign for a short time over the sex, they neglect to stamp impressions on their husbands' hearts. So where are we? We are talking about because they are not nursing, because they are more interested in their beauty at the time, and because of their beauty at the time, they get to rule the household, but they don't have that bond. They don't have that bond with their husband. That would be remembered when the tenderness, when the snow on the head began to chill the bosom, and even their virginal charms. So as they get older in age, they don't have that tie with their husbands. The maternal solitude of a reasonable, affectionate woman is very interesting. And the chastened dignity with a mother returns the caresses of that she and her child receive from a father who has been filling the serious duties of his station is not only respectable, but a beautiful sight. So singular indeed are my feelings, and I have endured not to catch fictitious ones, that after having been fatigued with the sight of insipid grandeur, and the slavish ceremonies with the cumbrous pomp supplied the place of domestic affection, I have turned to some other scene to relieve my eye by resting it on the refreshing green, everywhere scattered by nature. I have then viewed with pleasure a woman nursing her children, and discharging the duties of her station with, perhaps, merely a servant maid to take off her hands the servile part of the household business. I have seen her prepare herself and children with only the luxury of cleanliness, to receive her husband, who returning weary home in the evening found smiling babes in a clean hearth. My heart has loitered in the midst of this group, and even throbbed with sympathetic emotion when the scraping of the well-known foot has raised a pleasing tumult. So this is what she wants to see. She wants to see women in this position. But what is she seeing? She is seeing the preposterous distinctions of rank which render civilization a curse. By dividing the world between voluptuous tyrants and cunning, envious dependents, corrupt almost equally every class of people. Because respectability is not attached to the discharge of the relative duties of life, but to the station. And when the duties are not fulfilled, the affections cannot gain sufficient strength to fortify the virtue of which the natural reward. Still there are some loopholes out of which a man may creep, and dare to think and act for himself. But for a woman it is a Herculean task, because she has difficulties particular to her sex to overcome which require almost superhuman powers. So men can change their behaviors, but why is it so difficult for women to change their behaviors? A truly benevolent legislator always endeavors to make it in the interest of each individual to be virtuous, and thus private virtue becoming the cement of public happiness. An orderly whole is consolidated by the tendency of all the parts towards a common center. But the private or public virtue of a woman is very problematic. For Rousseau, an innumeralist of male writers, insists that she should all her life be subjected to severe restraint, that of propriety. Why subject her to propriety, blind propriety, if she is capable of acting from a nobler spring? Is she to be an heir of immorality? Is sugar always to be produced by vital blood? Is one half of the human species, like the poor African slaves, to be subject to prejudice that brutalize them, when principles would be sure guard, only to sweeten the cup of man? Is not this indirectly to deny women reason? For a gift is mockery if it is to be unfit for use. So she women have the ability. Rousseau says no, they should be restrained, but she is arguing they have it. Women are in common with men, rendered weak and luxurious by the relaxing pleasures which wealth procures. But added to this, they are made slaves to their persons, and must render them alluring, that man may lend them his reason to guide their tottering steps aright. Or should they be ambitious, they must govern their tyrants by sinister tricks. For without rights there cannot be any incumbent duties. These laws respecting women make an absurd unit of a man and his wife, and then by the easy transition of only considering him as responsible, she is reduced to a mere cipher. The being who discharges the duties of its station is independent. And speaking of women at large, their first duty is to themselves as rational creatures. Again, here is the Renaissance, rational creatures. And the next in point of importance, as citizens, is that which includes so many of a mother. The rank in life which dispense with their fulfilling this duty necessarily degrades them by making them mere dolls. Or should they turn into something more important than merely fitting drapery upon a small, smooth block? Their minds are only occupied by some soft, platonic attachment, or the actual management of an intrigue may keep their thoughts in motion. For when they neglect domestic duties, they have it not in their powers to take the field, and march and countermarch like soldiers, or wrangle in the Senate to keep their faculties from resting. I know that as proof of the inferiority of the sex, Rousseau has exultingly exclaimed, how can they leave the nursery for the camp? And the camp has, by some moralists, been termed the school of the most heroic virtues. Though I think it would be a puzzle, a keen casuist, to prove the reasonablest of the greater numbers of war they have dubbed heroes. So should they be at home? Should they be in war? Where should they be? Rousseau says they should be at home. I do not mean to consider this question critically, because having frequently viewed these freaks of ambition as the first natural mode of civilization, when the ground must be torn up and the woods cleared by fire and sword, I do not choose to call them pests. But surely the present system of war has little connection with virtue of any denomination, being rather the school of finesse, effeminacy, and then of fortitude. So we don't want to compare to war. Yet in defensive war, the only justifiable war, in the present advanced state of society, where virtue can shew its face and ripen amidst the rigors which purify the air on the mountain's top, were alone to be adopted as just and glorious. The true heroism of antiquity might again animate female bosoms. But fair and softly, gentle reader, male or female, do not alarm thyself. For though I have compared the character of a modern soldier to that of a civilized woman, I am not going to advise them to turn their distaff into a musket. Though I sincerely wish to see the bayonet converted into a pruning hook, I only recreated an imagination, fatigued by contemplating the vices and follies, which all proceed from a virulent stream of wealth that has muddied the pure reels of natural affection. By supposing that society will some time or other be so constituted that man must necessarily fulfill the duties of citizen, or be despised, and that while he was employed in any of the departments of civil life, his wife, also an active citizen, should be equally intent to manage her family, educate her children, and assist her neighbors. So there is the piece. What should women be viewed at? But to render her really virtuous and useful, she must not, if she discharge her civil duties, want individually the protection of civil duties, want individually the protection of civil laws. She must not be dependent on her husband's bounty for her subsistence during his life, or support after his death. For how can a being be generous who has nothing of his own, or virtuous, or is not free? The wife in the present state of things, who is faithful to her husband, and neither suckles nor educates her children, scarcely deserves the name of a wife, and has no right to that of a citizen. But take away natural rights, and duties become null. Women thus must be considered as only the wanton solace of men. When they become so weak in mind and body that they cannot exert themselves unless to pursue some frothy pleasure or to invent some frivolous fashion. What can be more melancholy sight to a thinking mind than to look into numerous carriages that drive helter-skelter about this metropolis in a morning full of pale-faced creatures who are flying from themselves? How is she describing women? I have often wished with Dr. Johnson to place some of them in a little shop with a half a dozen children, looking up to their languid countenances for support. I am much mistaken if some latent vigor would not soon give health and spirit to their eyes, and some lines drawn by exercise of reason on the blank cheeks, which before were only undulated by dimples, might restore lost dignity to the character, or rather enable it to attain the true dignity of its nature.